morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you are right now. Welcome to the very first day of the ADPN virtual conference with the theme of collaboration. We hope you enjoyed our kickoff session earlier at 8 a.m. And the session now is Collaborating to Achieve the SDGs. Collaboration is the essence of life. The winds, the bees and flowers work together. Unity is strength. When there is teamwork and collaboration, wonderful things can be achieved. I am Dorothy Ching, your friendly ADPN host for this session and the best looking one on the ADPN team. I am delighted that you are here with us. ADPN is the largest network for philanthropists and social investors in Asia. No other network matches our reach here in Asia. Our mission is to move capital towards impact, to build you, me, and our future generation. The virtual conference runs this whole week. We will be sharing daily highlights live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So don't forget to share your experience with us by using the hashtag ADPN2020. A few housekeeping announcements before we start the program. If you get disconnected or have a bad connection, try to log out of the app and then log back in. If you are using the browser, highly discouraged, refresh the page. Ensure that you are not running other programs in the background. If you still run into issues, please go to the Tech Help Desk. Please note that this session will be recorded. You will be able to access the recording later on the ADPN conference website. There is a community chat box in this room. Feel free to introduce yourself and meet other delegates in the room. You can also share any comments throughout the session. There will be an audience Q&A towards the end. Do type your questions in the Q&A pod for the moderator. We also have a resource pod here. Feel free to access the materials that are listed here. Finally, to maximize your networking experience, if you are a member or a policy ticket holder, make full use of the ADPN connector. You can find it on the conference website. I will now introduce you to our lovely moderator, Matthew Bishop. Matthew is a former editor of The Economist and also the author of Philanthro Capitalism. Please join me in welcoming Matthew.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Dorothy, for that warm introduction. The focus of this panel is to really look at this moment that we're in today with the crisis around the COVID-19 virus and everything associated with it, and to ask, how do we use this moment to energize us to take the kind of big changes that need to be taken as a humanity if we're going to get back on track for the SDGs. And as you all know, even before this crisis began, the world was not on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030. The Social Progress Index that I helped co-found, we calculated that on current trends pre-pandemic, we would not be reaching the SDGs until 2072 at the earliest. Clearly, if we were to run that test again today, it would be much later than 2072. And these are targets that we hope to achieve by 2030. So how do we use this moment to move off continuing pre-existing trends and get onto a different track, a faster track? Pretty clearly, hence the title of this session, it's going to require a great deal of collaboration between people and organizations that maybe were not so good at collaborating prior to this crisis. A multi-stakeholder approach, governments, business, social entrepreneurs, philanthropists, venture philanthropists, all need to find ways to collaborate better than they've ever done before if we are going to get back on track. Now, we have an extraordinary panel to help us look at what we need to do if we're going to get on track, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. Firstly, though, we're going to ask you all a question so we know the kind of audience that is here today, who you are. And we've made, what some of you may feel is a slightly arbitrary distinction between two categories of person. One is a doer, So if you work for an NGO, a social enterprise, or a business, we'd like you to categorize yourself as a doer. On the other hand, if your primary work is for a donor organization or supporting the ecosystem of donors, please categorize yourself as a donor. And if you genuinely feel you're spending roughly equal times in each of those activities, please answer both. So if you look on your app now, you should see the poll up in front of you. So please fill in. Well, there we are. So it's good to see plenty of doers. We need lots of doers, and we've also got a good smattering of donors there. One in 5 of you roughly is a donor, and about a quarter put your feet in both camps. So all told, that probably means getting on for 40% of the people here. Have some money to dispense as well as being inclined, and a good 70% of you really are on the front line of doing things as well. So that's a pretty encouraging start. So the panelists that we have to help us address this question of how do we collaborate better, how do we get onto a much more faster pace of innovation at scale. We have Debbie Ang Din, who's co-founder of Proximity Design. She's had an extraordinary career in many organizations, including USAID, the UN, and the World Bank before Proximity Designs, and she's focused for much of her career on all sorts of challenging poverty alleviation activities in places ranging from Mississippi to Cambodia and Indonesia. Her current focus is really in Myanmar, where she's helped build one of the country's largest agricultural service platforms for farm technology, agronomy, and finance, really focused on helping small family farms be productive and profitable. And this has already impacted over 700,000 farm households and is closing in on a target of 1 million customers within the next few years. And she is a Skoll Foundation Social Entrepreneur Awardee. Next up, we'll have Neelam Sheba, who many of you will know as the co-founder and managing trustee of Industree Foundation, and also co-founder and director at Mother Earth, and a Schwab Foundation Social Entrepreneur Awardee. She is working on regenerative economies with parts of India's 200 million strong artisanal workforce, focusing on providing design, technical marketing, and management solutions to bridge the urban-rural divide. And that project is now really transforming and evolving into building a platform for inclusive entrepreneurship for women, with a very strong technology enablers built in, so that in the years to come, solutions being built could use the power of networks to achieve scale much faster. She's a founding member of the Collaborative Initiative and Catalyst 2030, of which we'll hear more during this session, and also a founding member of Creative Dignity, designed to respond to the needs of the Indian artisan community during the coronavirus pandemic. And in her spare time, such as she has, Neelam loves to practice yoga. Then we have Vishnu Swaminathan, who is a leadership group member and vice president of Ashoka. He leads global partnerships and technology initiatives for change making, and is based out of Washington, D.C., and previous to that, he led Ashoka in Asia. He's been a social entrepreneur since 2008. He's created 2 independent organizations out of his work at Ashoka. One is the Indian Housing Federation, which is focused on policy and hybrid value chains of affordable housing. And the other is Nourishing Schools Foundation, which is focused on empowering school students to take charge of their own nutrition. And that's reached over 40,000 children in India. Also in his spare time, Vishnu tells us that he meditates daily to stay centered and stay apace with his work. And last but by no means least, Tim Hanstead, who is the CEO of the Chandler Foundation, and who I know for many years previous to this as the founder of Landesa, which is a global leading land rights organization that frequently appears in top 10 lists of top 10 NGOs. He is a Skoll Foundation Social Entrepreneur Awardee and a Schwab Foundation WEF Outstanding Social Entrepreneur. In his current role at the Chandler Foundation, he is running a foundation which was established by Richard Chandler, a New Zealand-born businessman and long-term philanthropist. And he is a founding member through that role of Co-Impact, which is one of the new collaborative platforms that's been seeded by Mr. Chandler and a number of other very high net worth individuals, along with the Gates Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation. And he has focused there, the Chandler Foundation, through Co-Impact on good governance, systems change, and the enabling conditions to provide opportunity for all. Tim is a lawyer and a social entrepreneur and a systems bridge builder, a proud husband to Chitra, a proud father of 4 adult children from whom he draws daily inspiration and learnings, and an all-round good human, as indeed are all our panelists. Now, the first round of questions, we're really going to focus on some practical examples of innovation at scale that have been built on effective collaboration. I'm going to start with Debbie. And really, your question, you've really had a focus on integrating local knowledge through your work to be very close to the proximate to the frontline needs of communities, and really have built up an ability to work to both combine that grassroots frontline knowledge with sustainable impact at a large scale. And I wonder what you could share with us, Debbie, in terms of what you've learnt about how to make that transition from the grassroots to scale, and particularly what forms of collaboration have been effective in delivering innovation for the communities you serve.
Thanks very much, Matthew, and good to be here. I just wanted to say that when we started in Myanmar about 16 years ago, that one of the critical decisions we made that was pivotal was really reframing the relationship we had with the communities we were serving. And, you know, I think it's really important to, I felt from our experience in aid work and in grassroots organizing that we wanted to have a relationship where we were equals, basically. You know, it really has to do with power dynamics, transparency, and accountability, and you know who makes the decision for whether what you're providing is valuable or not. And so I think for us, treating people, in our case, rural farm families, as customers who have choice and dignity, and they decide whether what we're providing is, you know, something of value to them, and we get immediate feedback and we're held accountable. So that reframing of that relationship, I think, is pivotal to our, you know, our ability to be impactful. And so another area was the ability to scale, was because they're customers. We have our own earned income as well as grants, and we're able to have a more sustainable financial organization that can grow at scale. And so we've been able to now serve over 700,000 farm families with products and services. And I think in our case, we saw where both the government sector and the private sector were failing to provide, you know, essential products and services to the huge small farm families that were needing basic services, and they were completely neglected by both sectors. And so we felt that it was very important for our work to be able to treat people as customers and to have our earned income so we could scale.
You have used the term market maker to describe what Proximate does. Can you just elaborate a bit more on how that role, that way of seeing yourself in this context, helps to deliver scale?
Yeah, and so when we saw this market that didn't exist of essential products and services that farm families needed, just basic things like irrigation systems. They were using, you know, heavy watering buckets on their shoulders, you know, 200-300 trips a day to just water crops. Just basic things were not available in the market, and so we said, well, how can we imagine and create a market and show people that there's a huge demand for this, so that other suppliers come in. So that is, how markets are made, to where we were able to stimulate demand, or show that there's demand for these products and services. And so today, 16 years later, there are other suppliers of small irrigation systems and products who have piggybacked on the market that was built. And so what we did was we seed the market by creating, designing products and innovative products that don't exist in the market, and we put them in the market. And so then people start adopting them and buying them, and then there's a demand, greater demand. And so we introduced, drip irrigation systems, the first to introduce that in the country, and now there's a few suppliers of that. And so I think it's the ability to, as a social enterprise, to see our role as not only creating and designing the products themselves and putting them in the market, but also allowing innovation so that other suppliers come in and can benefit from that.
Thank you. So, Neelam, for more than 30 years, Industree has focused on bridging this rural-urban divide in India, and you've been leading the charge there and made a great deal of progress in moving people out of poverty and into the middle class. Can you firstly explain or describe briefly how Industree approaches reducing poverty in India, and what principles from this approach could be more broadly applied to the other Sustainable Development Goals and in other places beyond India?
Thank you, Matthew. And it's wonderful to be here with this wonderful panel and all the participants. Yes, it's a nice, fresh morning in India right now. I completely endorse everything Debbie said. I think collaborative nature of growth with the underserved that we work with is key to everything that needs to be done. What I'll add on has been in our experience is that we need to do wealth creation. So we have to look at the underserved moving beyond subsistence and into wealth creation and make them very strong economic actors. Because we all know the numbers, right? 1% of the world's wealth, 99% of the world's wealth lies with 1%. And the sheer numbers of people we have in the underserved it's completely mind-boggling. And how, even for a country like India, where the mandate is to double farmer income, how are you going to do that unless you move them up the value chain, you move them into more value-added products, and therefore our work is gradually transitioning into something that we call regenerative economy building. Frankly, our work started with the rural artisanal sector, because we've got, 300 years ago, India was, India's maximum contribution to GDP came from artisanal production and not from farming, right? So we were the world's second largest economy with the world's largest skill base in textile and all sorts of manufacturing, which was consumed within India. And over the last 300 years, there's been a complete decimation. I'm not against industrialization. So what we have done for the sector, and I'll come to collaboration towards the end of it, because what we think needs to be done cannot be done without co-creation and collaboration, is essentially looking at the fractured ecosystem. So it's like, you need fundamental infrastructure, like you need roads for development. So similarly, we've studied, and through hardcore practitioner work on the ground, that there's a very fractured ecosystem for manufacturing in India. So we call the sector now a creative manufacturing. That's been one of the seminal contributions. So we believe that the consumer, and in future with and COVID is really pointing it out, 66% of the global consumer is looking for sustainable consumption. So we've taken this sector and talked about it being all about sustainable consumption. Again, keeping the key consumer at the center and obviously treating the underserved producer also as a consumer, because that person needs access to a bunch of services, which is how the ecosystem, which is fractured, will repair itself. Little complex, just to simplify it. Over the years, we discovered and we called out this ecosystem as being the 6C ecosystem. So the 6 C's, I'll very quickly summarize them for you, are construct, which is aggregation, because artisanal production in India is completely home-based. But when you speak to an artisanal producer, they're very key that they want to earn better. So we talk about aggregating women, and there's a lot of focus on women because it's easier to aggregate women. So we aggregate women in producer collectives or social enterprises, which they own. Because wealth creation is only going to come once you move them up the ladder of ownership, actually, right? And then the second C is capacity, which is all kinds of skilling and training, on which India is very, very gung-ho. And the third C is create, which is value-added design and obviously the kinds of innovations in technology which Debbie is talking about. And the fourth C is channel or market access. And the fifth C is capital. So the underserved, as we all know, have absolutely very, very poor access to capital. And the last C is connect. So that's the digital framework. And that's where the platform for inclusive entrepreneurship comes in. And that is being co-created and collaborated upon right now with, I think, a pretty large group of actors in India, and it's going global slowly. And so the platform will be about people providing these 6C services. And it will be an exchange of 6C services for the underserved. So I hope I've managed to share something in a nutshell.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll probably dig into some aspects of that a bit later. Vishnu, I think we've talked a lot already about this need to achieve much greater scale and pace of innovation than we've seen before, particularly across the social sector. And we talk a lot about systems change and a systems change mindset. I wonder if you could talk a bit about what you've seen working in terms of systems change, innovation, and how to structure collaboration to help make that happen.
Thank you, Matthew. A pleasure to be here. So I think before we talk about systems change, I think it's important to kind of underline what is truly systems change. And in my experience and also in Ashoka's experience, we believe that the seed of systems change actually begins when a social entrepreneur, or any entrepreneur for that matter, begins to let go, right? Begins to let go of the ego of the idea. Meaning that's the fundamental beginnings of a systems change. Now, what do I mean by that is you have to move beyond your own organization to be able to cause systems change. Now, when you stop scaling your organization, or when you stop measuring your success by the size of the organization, then what do you do, right? Meaning the question is then what do you focus on? So, then you start getting completely driven by the impact of the idea rather than your own organization. And then you start to alter or shift or transform the system's characteristics. The system which is surrounding the idea, you begin to transform them. And obviously that requires collaboration. Now, there are various manifestations of systems change, what we have seen. And the most obvious one which everybody knows about is when you can change a policy. When you change something which governs much beyond your own organization, then you work with the government to change policy. That's the most obvious one. Then obviously, the other ones that are connected ones are, when you make sure your idea can be independently replicable, where many people are able to take your idea and run with it. Or, for example, you change the market dynamics by bringing various different stakeholders, or we call them as value chain innovations. And obviously the last one I just want to kind of mention is when you can really enable a lot of people to come and join your movement, right? So, and then, you start transforming mindsets of the society. So this is probably how we have seen various elements of systems change take place. And, obviously I can go on with a lot of examples of how this manifests in each one, but let me just pause here, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think just to build on that point about policy and government, because I think anyone dealing with in the COVID-19 pandemic arena at the moment is very conscious of a lot of government money, but also a lot of government need out there. I just wonder what you've learned about working, particularly in the policy and working with government area, and any examples of success that you've seen in the past that could inform people grappling with these challenges today.
Sure. My favorite example is of Takeshi-san from Japan. He's an Ashoka fellow and a social entrepreneur, and he created an organization called CarePro. What he did was, it's connected to COVID because it's so important about early diagnosis, right? So even early days, in 2010 or something, he saw that the need for healthcare checkups was so important, right? So then what he did was he created
Have we lost Vishnu there? I think maybe I'll move to Tim while we're waiting for Vishnu to return. I mean, Tim, you've been someone who has talked and written about collaboration, the need for collaboration for a long time, and you've also got involved in organizations like Co-Impact and with Catalyst 2030. Could you talk a bit about why and what you're seeing work?
Wonderful to be here at the virtual AVPN conference and with this esteemed group of panelists, and I hope we get Vishnu back soon. You pointed out at the very beginning, Matthew, that we are not on track to meet the SDGs, and I think that we shouldn't lose sight of that. In fact, we're not anywhere close. We're going to have to, I think, change how we think about this and how we approach it. And in considering how to act differently, I think the social sector, that is social investors, philanthropists, NGOs, social entrepreneurs, should first realize that the world's ability to achieve the SDGs is going to depend much more on government and much more on markets, on business, than it will the social sector. And that's, I'm not sure that we fully have grasped that. And I want to put it another way. Governments and the business sector are much more important players than philanthropists and NGOs for creating good in the world or creating ill in the world. So I believe that recognizing that at the beginning is important. And that's not to say that that the social sector isn't important or that we should all give ourselves a pass. Not at all. In fact, the social sector has a very, very important role to play, but I think we need to change the dominant paradigm. Because I think the dominant paradigm of the social sector has been for us to look for problems, look for hurt, go try to address it with direct service delivery. And that, of course, is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think it shouldn't be the dominant paradigm. In most cases, those problems are the result of government failure or market failure. And I think we need to place much more focus and make the dominant paradigm of the social sector. How can we help government work better, more efficiently, and how can we help markets work more efficiently? And I think if we start doing that, we will do a better job of meeting our potential as a social sector. So you asked specifically. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was intrigued, particularly in the light of that, which I think is a very important point. But you've, at the Chandler Foundation, have recently supported Catalyst 2030, which is a social entrepreneur-led movement focused on achieving the SDGs. I mean, particularly given what you've just said. I mean, why Catalyst 2030 and why now?
Yeah. Yeah, well, building on the points made by the earlier on the panelists, I mean, Debbie talked about making markets. Neelam talked about the ecosystems and essentially making industries work better. Vishnu's talking about systems change. All of this is moving upstream, looking at causes rather than symptoms, which is very much needed. We need better styles and platforms for collaboration. And so Catalyst 2030, which many may not be aware of, is a social entrepreneur-led movement for catalyzing change to accelerate progress on the SDGs through a systems change approach. And I'm really excited about it because I think it has great potential. You have literally scores, more than 100 world-class social entrepreneurs from all across the world who have gathered together very organically, who facilitated by some of the social entrepreneur kind of ecosystem organizations, Ashoka, Schwab Foundation, Skoll, Echoing Green, and they are looking at collaboration, not just collaboration among social entrepreneurs, collaboration across sectors, with government, with business, with donors. And so if you don't know about Catalyst 2030, take a look at the website. It's an exciting new movement, and I invite you to participate. I think we need all kinds of new styles of collaboration, certainly across sectors, and among donors too. I mean, you mentioned co-impact earlier. Co-impact's a donor collaboration. It is born out of the idea that not a single donor or a single NGO can't address these big problems by themselves. We have to collaborate. We have to get more people in the room co-creating, learning from each other.
Great. Well, look, we're more than halfway through already, so, and I want to come to audience questions and have one more round with each of the panelists before we do that. Before we do that, though, we have one more audience poll. And there's quite an interesting practical question here, which is, as we think about achieving the SDGs, do you think the bigger priority is to get better collaboration within a particular sector, or is it multi-sector collaboration that is really the priority at this moment in time? If you click on the app, we'll get a sense of how you're thinking. It is looking like multi-sector collaboration is definitely what you all feel is most needed, and I think I agree with that. I want to move quickly on to Debbie, and very much in the context of the SDGs, but getting there from here, which is the biggest crisis really of many of our lifetimes globally. Where do you feel any sense of optimism, particularly around our ability to collaborate and co-create better around innovation?
Yeah, I think for Asia, I'm optimistic about the young social entrepreneurs that I see with new startups and just trying to innovate, social innovations, and so that there's a lot of energy there, and using technology and just a lot more access to information and knowledge with technology. So and that is I think facilitating collaboration across sectors and across helping breaking down those silos. So I'm optimistic about that. I do think that we need to improve by having more dialogue and having more spaces with government departments, and I do meet a lot of champions in government departments who are quite isolated and feel that way, and so I think looking for opportunities to collaborate, I think they are open to it as well and are ready to engage. And lastly, I think for us, it's the farmers and the rural families that we're designing for, who I think, are most important, and to really engage closely. It's about being proximate with them. It's about understanding their context and being curious and having that constantly learning from them, and being in touch with them, and putting products in front of them and getting their input. So just having that consistent engagement is really important, that you can do that by designing products and services for them. So I think that that kind of sort of curiosity and humility and constant learning and listening is super important.
Great. Neelam, what do you see in terms of new types of NGO collaborations? Are you seeing anything that makes you optimistic? And I will say this to all the panelists. I mean, please, to what extent is this COVID experience that we're going through changing the dynamics and actually creating maybe a bigger window of opportunity for donors and social entrepreneurs to have a say, get a seat at the table with governments and business to actually get better collaborations?
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. I think one of the things that's going to be repeated really often is that in every crisis there is an opportunity. COVID has done what was taking years, right? So I think this whole collaborative spirit, this whole breaking of barriers, it's just been sort of speeded up phenomenally. And it's like Vishnu said, the foundation is the ego, right? So earlier, I think as a society, we cherished that whole capitalist thought of go alone, go fast. But for organizations like ours, which are always under-resourced, because we're always trying to take on too much with very little resources. I mean, for 3 years, we worked on the platform for inclusive entrepreneurship as a collaborative with about 30, 40 organizations already. And that was my key interest in Catalyst 2030. And I'm amazed. I cannot talk enough positively about Catalyst 2030. The learning I've had from it for the last 6 months, I think October 2019 was when it was initiated. And prior to that, I had already met Vishnu, I think a year, 18 months ago. We'd already decided to work collaboratively on a 100% producer-owned brand. So things are moving along slowly. But I think post-COVID, movements like Catalyst 2030, the learning curve has dramatically grown. I'll just call out 2 things here and stop. One was on Tim's point on the market. I think that is so critical. For about 7 years, we've been in a relationship with IKEA. Corporates, and we've been in a relationship with H&M. Corporates are more and more and more ready. I think post-COVID, big business is something that needs to be reached out in a co-creative and collaborative fashion. And I'll just call out one thing on collaboration. This is something we learned while working on the platform for inclusive entrepreneurship from a professor from the C.K. Prahlad Center at Ross, Michigan, that the foundation of collaboration is co-creation. Right? So you've got to co-create things together. Collaboration doesn't happen. You say, this is my idea, come join me. No, that's not going to happen. So the co-creation process is what needs to be looked at with great intensity. How do we all co-create together? And through Catalyst 2030, I have learned a lot. And frankly, in India, we've initiated a movement called Creative Dignity post-COVID, which was, and it brought about, it's brought together 1,000 professionals, right? Not under the Creative Dignity banner, but under a bunch of banners. But there is a great movement out to, and overnight, in about a month, we've had a bunch of fantastic volunteers, all young designers, professionals, who pushed out a diagnostic to more than 2,000 grassroots organizations. And in a month, we have access to 200,000 rural artisans. This would have been unthinkable earlier. So this is the power of collaborative movements.
Thank you, Vishnu. Sorry we lost you a bit earlier. You may want to finish briefly the point you were making about our friend in Japan, but I wanted to ask you specifically to talk to the donor community about how they may more effectively partner and get involved in multi-stakeholder collaborations to achieve the SDGs.
Sure. So I just want to quickly close what I was saying. Sorry about that earlier. I was talking about Takeshi-san, and you can look him up later on. He's the creator of Care Pro, where he created this ability to get your health checkups done for like $6 in street corners, train stations, and department stores. And in 2014, the government actually picked it up and made a legislation based on that for getting self-health checkups. And now there are 1,600 competitors in Japan. So he actually took the idea and others copied it, right? So that's the beauty of systems change. I wanted to just point out that, when we talk about multi-stakeholder engagement, I just want to kind of go, just add on to what Neelam was saying. One principle I would really like to point out is, please try to engage unusual allies. Go beyond the usual suspects. Right? And the usual suspects are companies, the governments, and et cetera, et cetera. But how do we go beyond them to unusual suspects? I call them unusual allies. And when we talk about unusual allies, you never know. A quantum physicist might be able to solve a community problem. Have you thought about that? Like, how do you actually get the government to work with you? Have you worked with an economist? Et cetera, et cetera. I can go on and give you examples. But one of the key things to understand here is we need to have a midterm to a long-term perspective. You cannot do multi-stakeholder in a very short-term perspective. It's not going to work. And my experience has been that we have to make multi-stakeholder engagement as a core strategy, not just an add-on. The way you work has to change, and inherently to change it, you have to make it a core strategy. Companies are now, like what Neelam was saying, companies are more and more willing to do that. Governments are willing to do that, and they are willing to listen to social organizations, and social organizations are also willing to change that. So I think that is the core principle I would like to place here, Matthew.
Great, that's very helpful. Tim, we've already talked about how the SDGs, we were not on track to achieve them even before the COVID pandemic, and as we think about building back better out of this crisis, I mean, are there specific thoughts that you have on how there is opportunity uniquely in this crisis to build those kind of collaborative approaches that we've been talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I think there is. I think that, as Neelam said, one of the advantages we have from this pandemic is that the pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in our systems, and I think highlighted the need to build up stronger systems for the long term. So for example, just to give you one example, I know there was a question that came in when I was talking earlier about how do we engage with the government in a way, but you think about personal protective equipment, and there's certainly as a NGO, one could think about an NGO providing PPE directly. But if you think about bigger systems and who is providing that, depending on the country, but the governments can play a much bigger role in providing PPE. And when you think about, well, the government procurement policies may be broken or inefficient, non-transparent, and not doing a good job of providing those PPEs, we could, more of us ought to be thinking about how do we change government procurement policies. It seems like a kind of an obscure thing, but a third of government spending comes through government procurement. And when that government procurement is non-transparent or inefficient or corrupt, we have real problems, and there is real opportunities for us now that the pandemic and other things have exposed the weaknesses of the systems. I can't help but think about things going on in the country where I live right now in terms of Black Lives Matter. We have instances of police brutality, of course, that have been going on forever. We're becoming more aware of them now because everyone now has a video camera in their pocket. These are structural problems. It's not a problem of having to change police behavior in Minneapolis by a couple of bad police. This is built within the structure of the systems. And I'm, for one, am encouraged by the response we're getting, not just to the pandemic, but to things that these injustices that we're seeing around police brutality and racism here. It is that type of pressure on the systems and getting people to think about how do we reform, rebuild, strengthen, change these systems. We are in an opportune moment, and we best take advantage of it.
Thank you. So we're going to move into the audience questions now. And I have a question from Bitra George. I think I'll stick with you, Tim, firstly. How is the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly the fact that there's obviously a lot of economic devastation that's being caused, how is that going to affect donor funding in the short to mid-term? And will also the pandemic affect government's commitments to moving towards the SDGs, do you think?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. First of all, related to my first point about the role of philanthropists and then the role of government in responding. Philanthropy has responded with billions of dollars in response to COVID around the world. Governments have spent trillions. So again, government is the much bigger player. Again, that's not to take away from what philanthropists can do, or they can do more and should do more, and should also respond more flexibly. That is, I believe, as someone who has been more on the doer side over the last 30 years than on the donor side, I would like to see donors be more grantee-centric, recognizing that by giving more flexibility, by providing longer-term funding, by providing unrestricted, more flexible funding, have faith in those that you're giving funding to, because they are right now, particularly in the pandemic, are needing to shift to respond to changing external circumstances, and it's that type of flexible and longer-term funding that that is needed.
Thank you. So a deceptively simple question from Ashwin Deshmukh, which is, how do you make collaborative successful? I guess the devil is in the details. I mean, that's certainly been my observation, is that everyone talks collaboration now, but actually making collaborations work is very hard. Neelam, do you want to kick us off, and then maybe Debbie?
Yeah, so we're all learning the 101 on how to build successful collaborators. But frankly, I think it's got a lot to do what Vishnu said, right? You really have to keep your egos down, have a lot of patience, a lot of trust. I think trust is super key, right? So, and the fact that you can't do it anyway yourself. There's just no earthly way, right? The scope of problems are just too immense. So, and also there needs to be structure. There needs to, we're seeing that structure is required. So there can always be a lot of good intent, but structure is critical. Governance is critical of the collaborative. So, but I think a shared vision is key. That's where it all will start from. And I hope that answers the question.
I think it's
I think it is about Can you hear me?
Now. It is on now. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it is about building unusual allies, as Vishnu said, and in order to do that, it does take time to build trust, and not take credit for things, and just be willing to listen and hear the other person's side, and understand their context. Context is everything. And again, I believe that being proximate is also really important, and just understanding the nuances of a situation and a problem, and then and understanding that stakeholder's point of view is very important. And so it's about context and getting in their shoes and understanding where they're coming from.
Thanks. We've got a question from Mark Sayer, which is, do you have any advice or suggestions for NGOs who want to engage government and business sectors in a strategic approach where everyone has a seat at the table rather than only asking for funding and support? Vishnu, maybe you kick us off on that, and then maybe Neelam.
Yeah, I think we obviously, we cannot just depend on the government on support financially, right? So basically, we just need to look at all the collaborations we can bring to the table. I think what is key here is knowledge, and what works on the ground. I think the how-tos are the ones which are so critical, and that's kind of what all the stakeholders are looking for, and even the government. For example, the Delhi government in India wanted to launch a curriculum called the Happiness Curriculum in schools. And they actually brought together social entrepreneurs across India just to come and co-author the curriculum. So the government is also very open to ideas which truly work on the ground. So, there are many ideas where you don't need the money from the government. But I would say that working with government on policy, you can have multiple dimensions of working with the government on policy. For example, you can be an advisor, you can be a researcher, you can represent marginalized group in courts, or you can, eventually convince government to allocate funds. But, funding alone need not be the only focus when we work with governments.
Neelam, advice for those NGOs?
Yeah, so I'll be frank. I think it takes everyone many years to crawl up the value chain and to to build a strong body of work. But even after you've built the body of work in your NGO, you may never still get a seat at the table for the strategic stuff that you really believe in. And therefore, I think Catalyst 2030 and things like that are an answer for that. How does the social entrepreneur's voice from the ground, how does the practitioner's voice reach where strategy is being decided by governments, by business? And therefore, I think the whole logic of doing it together, doing it in a force, not doing it individually, is the solution.
Great, well, thank you. We're pretty much out of time, and so I must apologize to other members of the audience that have sent in questions that we haven't been able to answer. But I want to ask each of the panelists to really give us their final takeaway. And there's a kind of two-part takeaway. One is to ask each of you, over the next 12 months, with that focus, what would you most like to see to advance this cause of collaboration around using this moment of crisis to accelerate our chances of achieving the SDGs? And then I would ask each of you if you could think of one particular application in Asia of that one thing that you're flagging up. So we will go in the order we started with Debbie first. What's the one thing you really think we need to prioritize above all else over the next year, and an Asian example, possible?
Yeah, I think for me it's I think it's the food crisis that is very much a crisis within a crisis. That the food crisis is very much on the heels of the pandemic. And if we don't pay attention to the millions of smallholder farm families who produce food for many of our countries, and they themselves are hungry, they themselves don't have enough income, and so it's they need to be able to be equipped to grow food safely and sustainably, profitably, in a way that's good for the environment. And it's all wrapped up with climate change as well. So I think if that basic, foundation to the planet and the food production is not taken care of, then I think I think it's important to lift millions and millions of these aspiring rural farmers out of poverty, and that in doing so, it'll really avert social decline and the political chaos and terrorism and environmental breakdown that's sure to happen if this gap between the rural poor and the urban elites widens further in many of the countries in Asia. So I hope yeah.
Okay, I'll move swiftly on to Neelam, and just a reminder, we're almost out of time, so please keep your remarks. This is a final sort of one sentence summing up, please.
Yeah, I mean, just the pandemic is decimating our economies, and the people who are going to bear the brunt of it are those at the bottom of the value chain, right? We've had millions of migrants heading back home to the villages, and what are they going to do there? What are they going to eat? They left in the first place because they were not able to survive. So, and I'm sure that can be across Asia, right? So just sharing this thought that how do we really expect trickle-down economics to still work, right? I don't think it's worked or is working. So we've got to just focus on systems change fast now, starting now, to help these people out.
Great, Vishnu.
Yeah, for me, we cannot let problems outrun solutions. So to tackle all the problems which we are facing, we need millions and millions of people to become change makers. So can we make our jobs as a core part of our jobs to actually inspire, train, get people to become more change makers and show them the path and mentor them, advise them, get them to be change makers. And that can be applicable globally, Matthew.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has shown that we have a governance crisis, and that the social sector needs to spend more time and energy on focusing on improving governance, making government more accountable, more participatory, more capable.
Great. Well, this has been a really great discussion. My final thought is twofold. Firstly, that I think Tim made this point that we have had a very graphic example during this pandemic of just how flawed our existing systems are, how inequitable and how badly functioning are. We are never going to get a clearer demonstration to the rest of the world of the need for systems change. And the other is the point that I think Neelam made, which is let's think out of the box about who our allies are, and particularly find new allies, look to government and business to have new relationships there, because if we can't harness those institutions and bring them to the cause of systems change, then we're not going to succeed in delivering anything close to the SDGs. So I think we've had lots of great practical advice here and some inspiration, and I hope this sets up the rest of the AVPN virtual convening over the next few days to really come up with some big, bold systems changing visions and commitments. I'd like to thank everyone and hand back to Dorothy.
Thank you, Matthew.
This was a very popular session with over 800 people turning in. The generous support of our lead partner, Chandler Foundation. The next session is taking place at 12 p.m. It will be of great interest to many of you. The challenges for corporates in navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. Do tune in as you are enjoying your lunch, and I am sure your food will taste that much sweeter. If you're an ABPN member or a policy ticket holder, do continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates through the ABPN connector. Do check out the ABPN Hub as well and explore our thematic lounges. You can find both the connector and the hub on the conference website. Connect and hub, connect and hub, connect and hub. That is the power of our network. As we close, please fill in a session survey on your way out. It has just 4 questions and will take 30 seconds. The survey will pop up on your screen after this. We hope this has been a meaningful session for you. Remember, collaborate to innovate. Have a great day and an amazing week at the ABPN Virtual Conference. May the bandwidth be with you.